One of the most common questions that I get asked is, what visa have I got and how did I get it? Sometimes people have thought that I got the visa because I bought an Akiya here in Japan, but that is definitely not the case, and you don't get residency just because you bought a property here. You do actually have to have a visa of some kind. So let's get into how I got a visa to live and work here in Japan at 50 years old. So I think you all know my backstory by now, but if you're new to the channel, my name is Chani and I'm an Australian. I was a little bit stuck in a rut and I wanted to change my work-life balance and have a bit of an adventure. And I'd had this affinity with Japan since I came here as a homestay student when I was 18 years old. So I had been wanting to have a chance to move back to Japan, and the timing was just right for me, and I was at a stage in my life where that was going to be possible. I finally built up enough courage to make the move and start the processes. But let me tell you now, it really wasn't smooth sailing. There were lots of bumps along the way. So I'm going to tell you everything that I went through to get here to this point. By the way, if you watched my last video, you'll know that I just bought a brand new Suzuki Every camping car. So I still need to take it for a bit of a run. So while I'm telling you my visa story, I'm going to show a bit of footage of me taking a run to another onsen hotel in Nara. And I'm actually staying here at the hotel right now. I'm trying to get to my first 1,000 kilometers so it's ready for its first service. In my last video, I asked for name suggestions for a car, and I took those top 3 name suggestions and ran a poll, and the votes are now in. Drum roll please. And the winner is Mori. Mori means forest in Japanese, and it has the symbol of 3 trees. So let's get back to the visa story. And like I said, it wasn't all smooth sailing for me. In fact, it took quite a few years to make this dream a reality. One of the backstops or the plan Bs that I always had in the back of my mind is if I couldn't get a working visa to live in Japan, I could get a student visa. But the student visa route was a bit more difficult in the fact that it was going to be a lot more costly for me. So financially, it was a bit prohibitive for me to get a student visa. The school fees weren't exactly cheap, and I'd also be limited in my working hours because on a student visa, you can't work full time. You're only allowed to work a certain amount of hours, and that probably wouldn't be enough for me to support myself fully and pay for school fees. So I would have had to have lived in either a share house or a school dormitory or in a very small studio apartment. Being a little bit older and given that I'd lived in my own house for my whole life, I don't know if I'd be able to cope mentally with that kind of scenario. So plan B was always there in the back of my mind if things didn't work out, but I knew I wouldn't be entirely happy with that as an option. So with a little bit of research, it became really clear that I needed to get a working visa. And the only way to do this was to be sponsored by a company, so I would need to have a job. So I needed to get a job before I moved to Japan. So I started looking at a couple of websites. The main one I ended up using was Gaijin Pot. I'm going to put a link in the description below. But Gaijin Pot seemed to have the most amount of jobs, and you could search by area as well. So I started using Gaijin Pot to try and find a job. And in my case, it was a teaching job. So for a teaching job, you don't actually need a teaching degree. Even though I do have a teaching degree because I am a high school teacher, for teaching English in Japan, you don't necessarily need a teaching degree, you just need a degree of some sort. Now for the jobs, it's not just teaching jobs. I had a look around the website for immigration and there are so many different categories for working visa. For example, you could get an artist visa or you could get a skilled labor visa. So you might be a chef or you might be a sports trainer. So you just need to have whatever your qualifications are in your field and be able to prove that you have the experience to do this job. But I will say those jobs seem to be few and far between, with the most common job being teaching English. Look, there are just so many different categories of jobs and visas that you can apply for. So I'm going to put this in the description box. But I think your first step would be just to see what sort of category you might fit into, and then start applying for jobs within that category. So let's get back to getting a job, because you need that first before you can start applying for a visa. So the first year of applying for jobs, and when I say first year, this happened over a number of years. So the first year applying for jobs, I got 0 response. And I was applying for jobs that I was actually qualified for. So a lot of them were English teaching jobs. Some of them I was overqualified for, and some just about right, but just nothing. I applied for probably about 30 different jobs and got 0 response from all of them. Not even a thank you for your application letter. After about a year of not getting any responses, I noticed on Gaijin Pot there was an option to change overseas applications okay. So you can apply for companies that are happy to sponsor you from overseas. I realized that I probably didn't get a look in the door from the other jobs because they were looking for applicants who are already living in Japan. So I ticked the overseas application box and once again started to apply for jobs as new jobs came in. From that, I ended up getting 2 interviews, and these were both done via Zoom. Unfortunately, both of those job interviews didn't proceed to a job because they were both looking for primary school teachers, and I'm high school trained, so I didn't sort of meet their criteria and it didn't progress. So in 2022, I just had enough. I've been applying for jobs since 2021, not getting anywhere basically. So I decided to do something a little bit different, and I started researching schools in the areas that I wanted to live and work. And I started to send them direct emails. So I didn't bombard people with emails. I just sent a few select places emails with my resume and a cover note saying I was very interested in working for their company. From this tactic, I actually got 2 job interviews. Now, both of these interviews went very well because they already knew all about me and my qualifications and my desire to come and live in Japan, and they knew that I would be a long-term teacher for their company. So from this, I got 2 interviews and 2 job offers. So it really was the best way of doing it. But hang on a minute, it's too early to celebrate a job offer just yet, because the next comes the visa application process. And that's a huge process just in itself. I had to provide so much information and so many documents, copies of my degrees, transcripts, you name it. Another thing that I had to provide was my movements document. So I had to apply to the Australian government for my movements document, which is basically a document that shows every time you've been in and out of the country. And the reason I needed this is that I had been to Japan way more times than what the space allowed on the form. So because I'd been here as a homestay student, but then as a teacher, I had actually brought Japanese tour groups to and from Japan with my high school students. And I'd made so many trips that I needed to show exactly when I'd been in and out of the country. So all of this took about 3 to 6 months just to gather all the information that was needed for my application. And then the company that was sponsoring me sent my application in, and they applied for a certificate of eligibility. So I was waiting for this certificate of eligibility, and that was the next thing that means you're eligible to apply for the visa. Good news finally came through. I had been granted a certificate of eligibility, and that was going to be posted to me back in Australia. And then I had to take that to the Japanese consulate to get the visa put in my passport. So that's sort of like the next step. Like, you hope that all of the checks check out at the consulate and they'll actually issue you the visa. In my case, luckily the visa was issued in about 5 days after I applied for it. And I was also very lucky in that they issued me with a 3-year visa right from the get-go. So I've already used a year and nearly half of that visa, and I will be applying to renew that visa again once it gets closer to the expiry. And my intention is just to keep renewing the visa as I go along. Some people have asked me, will I be applying for permanent residency in Japan? Am I just in a honeymoon phase? Will I get sick of it? I don't know the answer to any of those questions just yet. I'm sort of taking each day as it comes and enjoying my life here in Wakayama. So I really don't know what the future holds. I do know that I'm planning on renewing my current visa with my current workplace. But for the future, I just don't know. I also get the question, will you retire in Japan? And again, I really don't know the answer to all of these questions. But I am preparing for both scenarios, and that is preparing for if I did retire in Japan, I am paying into the pension here. I'm also paying into my superannuation back home in Australia. So I'm trying to keep my eggs in both baskets, because at 50 years old, it's really hard to say where you'll be or where you'll want to be. And as you know, my family is in Australia. So my two beautiful boys are in Australia, and they both have lovely girlfriends. So, you know, one day they will probably get married and have kids. And I don't know how I'll feel about that and being so far away from them. I also have my parents to consider. So they're both fine at the moment, but I don't know how they'll be in 10 years' time. So I've got lots of different things to consider and think about. But at this stage, I'm okay to be here. And as I said, I just don't know what the next 10 years look like. But it's very hard to predict the future right now at this point in time. And I feel like I have a few years up my sleeve just to live here and enjoy my life and take each day as it comes. I guess my biggest tip for getting a visa for Japan is to get onto that website and do your research and find out what you qualify for. Once you've found out where you fit in the visa categories, then I would be looking at applying for jobs. And if you can't find the job you want at Gaijin Pot, why not do what I did and reach out directly to a couple of companies, sending them your resume and a cover letter. Don't just make it a blanket letter, tailor it to their company and let them know how keen you are to actually live and work in Japan. These are just some of my ideas and some of my tips, and it might be your ticket to Japan if that's something that you want to do. As many of you already know, I'm a qualified Japanese language teacher, and I've been teaching Japanese for over 20 years now. And one of the things I really recommend if you're going to live and work in Japan is learn Japanese. And you can start right from the very basics with my Japanese beginners alphabet and phonics course. Just go to the website www.chanijapan.com. and you'll find all the information and plenty of answers to your questions. I hope I've answered your questions about how I got a visa at 50 years old. Thanks again for watching, and if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. See you next time. Bye.